Last December, my wife, my son, and I went to France to visit family for the holidays. It was a year of firsts for me. It was the first time traveling abroad with my son, and it was the first time I traveled abroad in the last 20 years without a digital camera. Instead, I took this with me, the Pentax 17, along with a few rolls of Kodak Tri-X film. As I show you some photos from the trip, I want to reflect on my experiences using the Pentax 17 over the last 6 months, what I like about it, what I dislike about it, and I'll answer the question I get asked most often: is it actually worth it? But before we start, I should mention here that my wife asked me to pixelate our son's face in these images to protect his privacy. While this might rob some of the images of their magic, especially since, as you'll see later, this camera really shines as a documentary tool, I've chosen to respect her wishes. We flew into Toulouse. It's a city in the southwest of France where we spent our first few nights. Right away, the Pentax 17 size proved to be a smart choice, right? Especially when you're traveling with a baby and a lot of extra luggage. The camera size is one of its best features, I think. The more I use it, the more I appreciate how easily it slips into a pocket or to a bag. I've learned that when gear is small, I'm more inclined to use it, and use it in tight places, as you'll see later. Anyway, we had never visited Toulouse before, so we just wandered around and explored. We walked along the Garonne River where we fought against the wind. To warm up, we retreated into some of the city's cathedrals. Looking at these cathedral shots now, you can see that some are underexposed. I discovered when I left the first church, the exposure compensation dial had shifted in my bag, something I hadn't thought to check. And that's one of this camera's quirks. None of the settings lock into place, so they can easily get knocked around while in your pocket or even as you're handling it. I tend to treat this camera like a point-and-shoot camera because, in many ways, that's what it is. That means I often forget to check the settings, which aren't displayed in a viewfinder like a modern digital camera, of course, but you have to make checking the top plate a regular habit, and that's something I often forget to do. Anyway, we visited a Christmas market where my wife enjoyed some hot wine. We went back a few times, once that night where I took these photos. And then we took our son on his first carousel ride. But some of my favorite shots from Toulouse came from the tiny elevator in our Airbnb's building. The elevator was barely big enough for 2 people, and the walls were covered with mirrors. So every time we got inside, my son and I would take photos, playing with the reflections and things. This elevator shot ended up being one of my favorites from the entire trip. The finite nature of film changes how you shoot. There are no burst modes, no checking shots, no obsessing over settings to get the perfect frame. You take a couple of shots and you move on. And since it's a half-frame camera, I don't feel guilty taking several shots of the same scene. The camera's been marketed as a money saver because you get 2 images in a standard frame. But honestly, I end up shooting more. There's something about having those extra frames that makes me more trigger happy. Plus, knowing the camera's limitations, right? Its point-and-shoot approach and zone focusing system, I often work the scenes quite a bit to ensure that I get the focus right and get some variety. From Toulouse, we traveled to my wife's hometown for Christmas. It's a small town and we were visiting family, so we didn't do much exploring, but I still took a lot of photos. It was our son's first time meeting many of his relatives, including his great-grandfather, and the photos of them together became some of my favorites from the entire trip. And these images helped me understand what this camera does best. It's a documentary, lifestyle camera, though I wasn't even sure what that meant until I looked it up. According to Google, a lifestyle camera is a camera designed for capturing everyday moments and experiences, prioritizing portability and ease of use over technical specifications. It's meant, in other words, to be part of your daily routine rather than to be a part of your professional studio setup. And that's exactly what this camera is. It's a camera to carry everywhere and to document your life with. It isn't trying to be a professional camera with the latest features, and that's okay. The glass quality surpasses other half-frame options like the H35N, and the image quality is excellent. Let's not forget that most Hollywood films in the 20th century were shot on a cell size close to these half-frame images. But there's a cost to all of this, right? Using this camera isn't cheap. It's expensive. Film alone runs about, $10 to $12 per roll of 72 exposures. And if you don't develop and scan yourself, and if you use a lab, you can double that amount easily. I did manage to sneak away for a few hours one day to explore the town. I visited the castle and the church, trying my hand at some street photography. I'm not a street photographer by any means, but I still enjoyed the process anyway. Later, we had a big Christmas dinner with the whole family, and then we went on a walk to see the holiday lights. After Christmas, we hopped on a train to Paris. They say Paris is always a good idea, until it isn't, right? The city greeted us with darkness, gloom, rain, and bitter cold. Add a sick baby to that mix, and suddenly exploring the city of light became a dark adventure. We tried to make the best of it, shooting videos and photos in our Airbnb. But cabin fever essentially won out, and we bundled up our son as much as we could and set out for Montmartre through the cemetery from Batignolles. Most of the museums and galleries we wanted to see were closed, so, walking the city streets was all that we had left. We really only had one day and a night in Paris before our flight home. And so that last evening, with a few frames left to burn before the new year, I played around with the camera's bulb mode. It's an interesting feature, I suppose, but it's not one that I see myself using very often. Like Paris in winter, the Pentax 17 isn't always perfect. So, will I keep using it in 2025? Is it worth it? In short, yeah, it's worth it if you embrace its limitations and accept the camera for what it is. Over the past 6 months, this camera has grown on me. It's always with me. I toss it in my bag or I slip it into a pocket. For capturing everyday moments and building a physical archive of memories, it's a great option, especially if size and the cost of film is a concern. You don't need to have a variety of lenses and ultra-high resolution cameras to document your life. Something simple and light, like the Pentax 17, has proven to be a great everyday carry. I'm not opposed to digital cameras, right? If Sony would produce an RX1R Mark III, I'd be all over that. But until then, this little half-frame camera has earned its place in my pocket. And to be honest, these frames feel a little bit more special than the hundreds of digital snapshots that would be buried on a hard drive.